My name is Grace Foster. I was 28 years old when the biggest lie my family had ever built around me collapsed in less than 7 minutes. My mother didn't whisper it. She didn't say it behind closed doors. She looked directly at me in front of my entire family and calmly said I had always been worth less than my sister. She expected me to cry. She expected everyone else to nod. Instead, my grandmother reached into her purse, pulled out an old digital recorder, and quietly said, "Before anyone says another word, I think it's finally time everyone hears this. Before we get into this story, if you're someone who's ever been treated as the family scapegoat, forgotten, compared, or told your feelings didn't matter, hit that like button and subscribe. Stories like this remind us that the truth has a strange way of surviving, even when people spend years trying to bury it. Now let me tell you what happened. I used to think every family had a favorite child. Not because anyone admitted it, because growing up it seemed so normal. Someone always got the bigger bedroom. Someone always got the nicer birthday presents. Someone got defended no matter what they did. And someone else learned how to apologize for things they hadn't even done. That someone was me. Looking back now, I don't think I noticed it all at once. Favoritism isn't usually loud. It's 1,000 tiny moments. It's your sister spilling juice on the carpet and your mom laughing. Then you accidentally dropping a fork after dinner and hearing, "Grace, honestly, can you do anything right?" Little things, constant things. The kind that slowly convince a child they're simply less. My older sister Emily was 2 years ahead of me. According to my mother, Linda Foster, Emily was extraordinary. She was beautiful, talented, funny, destined for greatness. If Emily got a B in school, Mom insisted the teacher was unfair. If I got straight A's, Mom would ask why one of them wasn't higher. "You probably got lucky." I can't remember a single report card she ever hugged me over, but I remember every criticism. Every single one. Dad wasn't cruel. That almost made it worse. He just didn't intervene. He'd sigh, lower his newspaper, say things like, "Your mother's just trying to motivate you." Motivate. Funny word. Because nothing about it felt motivating. It felt exhausting. By the time I reached high school, I'd developed a habit. Whenever something good happened to me, I kept it quiet. Winning an academic competition? Didn't mention it. Getting accepted into an honors program? Didn't tell anyone until the paperwork came, because celebrating myself only seemed to irritate my mother. She'd always find a way to redirect attention. "That's nice, Grace." Then she'd turn toward Emily. "So tell everyone about your dance recital." It became predictable. Painfully predictable. Even relatives noticed. Sometimes. Grandma Eleanor definitely did. She was my father's mother. Unlike everyone else, she watched. Really watched. She noticed how often my plate mysteriously had less food whenever dinner ran short. How my birthday cakes became smaller over the years. How Emily somehow always received new clothes while I inherited hers, even after Emily started buying designer brands that weren't remotely my size. Grandma never confronted my mother in front of us. Not then. Instead, she'd quietly slip $20 into my backpack, bring me homemade cookies, or ask me questions nobody else did. "How are you really doing, sweetheart?" That question almost always made me cry, because nobody else asked. When I was 16, something happened that should have changed everything. It didn't. Emily crashed Dad's car. She had been texting while driving. Nobody was seriously hurt, thank goodness, but the front end of the car looked like crushed aluminum foil. Dad was furious, until Mom got involved. Within 20 minutes, somehow, it became my fault. "You distracted her before she left." I actually laughed. I thought she was joking. I was upstairs. "You upset her this morning." I literally said good morning. You always have an attitude. Emily sat there silently, never corrected her, never admitted she'd been texting. I took the blame. Insurance rates went up. Dad barely spoke to me for weeks. Emily got another car 6 months later. That was the moment something inside me quietly cracked. Not dramatically, just permanently. I stopped expecting fairness. Expectation creates disappointment. No expectations, no disappointment. Simple. Or so I told myself. College became my escape. I earned scholarships, worked part-time, graduated debt-free. Not because my parents couldn't help, because they wouldn't. Mom said supporting Emily's dream school was a better investment. Those exact words. A better investment. Emily dropped out after 3 semesters. I graduated with honors. Guess who got congratulated? Emily. Because she'd found herself. Meanwhile, my graduation dinner became a discussion about Emily's future plans. I remember staring at my untouched pasta while everyone brainstormed business ideas for her. Nobody asked what my degree was actually in. Nobody, except Grandma. She raised her glass. I'd like to congratulate Grace. Silence. For working harder than anyone I know. Mom smiled, that fake smile. Oh, Eleanor, don't exaggerate. Grandma didn't smile back. I wasn't. The room felt colder. Nobody argued. Nobody agreed. They simply changed the subject. That's how my family handled uncomfortable truths. Ignore them until they disappear. Unfortunately for them, truths don't disappear. They wait. By 28, I had built a good life. Not glamorous, not perfect, but peaceful. I worked as a project coordinator for a construction consulting firm. I rented a small townhouse, had a golden retriever named Maple. Made enough money to stop checking my bank account before buying groceries. To some people, that's ordinary. To me, it felt like freedom. Because every dollar I earned belonged to me. No one could tell me I didn't deserve it. No one could compare me. At least, outside my family. Inside? Nothing had changed. Mom still introduced Emily as my successful daughter. Emily had bounced through 4 different careers, 2 failed businesses, 1 expensive divorce, countless financial bailouts. Guess who paid? Mom and Dad. Guess who was constantly reminded to be more supportive? Me. Every family dinner somehow became a fundraiser for Emily's latest emergency. Grace, couldn't you loan your sister $5,000? No. She's family. So am I. Mom would sigh dramatically. You've always been selfish. Selfish. Because I wanted to keep money I'd worked for. Meanwhile, Emily would avoid eye contact. Not embarrassed. Just expectant. Like she genuinely believed my savings belonged to her. I stopped attending family dinners regularly after that. Peace became addictive. The fewer times I saw them, the better I slept. Then Grandma called. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. I still remember hearing dishes clinking softly in the background. Grace? Hi, Grandma. You sound tired. I am. I know. She paused. I'd like you to come to my birthday next Saturday. I smiled. Of course. I need everyone there. Something in her voice caught my attention. Not sadness, not excitement, determination. I've already told your parents they have to come. Oh? And Emily. That's ambitious. She chuckled. It may be the last birthday where we're all together. My stomach tightened. Grandma? Oh, don't fuss. I'm 82. I'm allowed to think realistically. I laughed despite myself. I'll be there. Promise? I promise. She hesitated before saying one final sentence. And Grace? Yes? No matter what happens next Saturday, don't leave early. The line went quiet. I frowned. What do you mean? You'll understand. Click. She hung up. I stared at my phone for nearly a minute. Something felt off, not dangerous, just important. I couldn't explain why. I barely slept the rest of the week. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed Grandma's words. Don't leave early. It sounded less like a request and more like a warning. At work, I caught myself making mistakes I never usually made. I entered the wrong figures into a spreadsheet, forgot a scheduled call, even poured coffee into my water bottle instead of my mug. My coworkers laughed it off, but my mind kept drifting back to Grandma. She wasn't dramatic. She never hinted at things for attention. If she said something mattered, it mattered. By Friday evening, I had convinced myself I was overthinking it. Maybe she had planned a family slideshow. Maybe she wanted to announce she'd be moving into assisted living. Maybe she simply wanted everyone together because birthdays meant more at 82. I tried to be rational, but deep down, I had the strange feeling that something buried for years was about to surface, and I had no idea whether I would survive hearing it. Saturday arrived with the kind of gray sky that made the whole world feel muted. Not stormy, not bright, just heavy. I remember standing in front of my bedroom mirror longer than usual, debating whether I should even bother dressing nicely. It sounds ridiculous now, but if you've spent your entire life feeling invisible, you start asking yourself strange questions. Why wear the nice dress? Who am I trying to impress? In the end, I chose a simple navy blue dress Grandma had bought me 3 Christmases earlier. It wasn't expensive, but she'd picked it herself. It's elegant, she'd said. Just like you. No one had ever called me elegant before. I slipped it on, looked in the mirror, and smiled for the first time that morning. Maple wagged her tail by the front door as if she sensed my nerves. I knelt beside her and rubbed behind her ears. Wish me luck. She licked my nose. Honestly, that was more emotional support than I'd received from most of my family. Grandma still lived in the same white farmhouse she'd shared with Grandpa for nearly 50 years. It sat on a quiet stretch of land just outside town, surrounded by maple trees that had grown so tall they almost formed a wall around the property. As a kid, I loved coming here, not because the house was fancy. It wasn't. The floors creaked. The wallpaper was older than I was. The kitchen cabinets had tiny scratches from decades of use. But the house felt safe. You know how some places seem to breathe? Like they remember laughter? That was Grandma's house. She baked bread every Saturday morning. The scent seeped into every room. Even now, the smell wrapped around me the moment I opened the front door. For a brief second, I forgot about my family. Grace! Grandma hugged me before I could even set down the pie I'd brought. She squeezed tighter than usual. Much tighter. You look beautiful. You say that every time. Because it's true every time. I laughed. Then I noticed something strange. She looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like she'd been carrying something far too heavy for far too long. There were deeper lines around her eyes than I remembered. But there was something else, too. Resolve. The kind you see in someone who's already made an impossible decision. Guests trickled in over the next hour. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors who'd known Grandma forever. People chatted over coffee, while old country music played softly through the kitchen radio. Everything felt normal, almost painfully normal, until my parents arrived. Mom entered first. As always. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect smile. The kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. There she is, she announced loudly. Our independent daughter finally decided to visit. Several relatives looked at me. I forced a smile. Hi, Mom. She air-kissed my cheek. Emily followed behind her wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. Designer purse, designer shoes, designer attitude. Grace. Emily. That was it. No hug, no warmth, just polite acknowledgement. Dad came in last carrying a bottle of wine. He looked older than I remembered. His shoulders seemed lower somehow. He hugged me briefly. Good to see you. You too. Then he immediately drifted toward the other men discussing football. Some habits never changed. Lunch started beautifully. Grandma insisted everyone sit together. 30 people squeezed around folding tables in the backyard. Kids ran through the grass. Birds chirped overhead. For about 20 minutes. I almost believed we could function like a normal family. Then Emily cleared her throat. So, she said loudly, I've been looking at opening another wellness studio. I stared down at my mashed potatoes. Here we go. Mom lit up instantly. Oh, tell everyone! Emily launched into a polished presentation about yoga, holistic nutrition, meditation packages, luxury memberships. It all sounded suspiciously similar to the boutique she'd closed less than a year earlier, the one my parents had invested nearly $80,000 into. My aunt politely asked, How are you funding this one? Emily smiled. I'm exploring family investment opportunities. I nearly laughed. Of course, family investment, which meant someone else paid. Mom looked directly at me. Grace has done well for herself. There it was. I felt every muscle in my neck tighten. I've worked hard. Mom smiled. Exactly. She folded her hands. So maybe it's time you gave something back. The table became quiet. I could actually hear wind moving through the trees. I already give back. Mom tilted her head. Not financially. There it is, I muttered. What? I was wondering how long it'd take. Oh, don't be dramatic. Emily finally spoke. I wasn't going to ask. Yes, she absolutely was. But if everyone thinks it's a good idea? I looked around the table. Several relatives suddenly found their food fascinating. Nobody wanted to get involved. Just like always. Mom leaned forward. You've got savings. Yes. Emily needs help. No. The answer came so quickly even I surprised myself. Mom blinked. No? No. Emily frowned. Grace. No. Mom laughed. Actually laughed. As if you'd even noticed $20,000 missing. $20,000. My heartbeat started pounding in my ears. I said no. You don't even have children. No. You don't have a husband. No. So what exactly are you saving for? I stared at her. There it was again. That familiar feeling. Like every achievement I'd ever earned only existed to solve Emily's problems. I don't owe anyone an explanation. Mom's smile disappeared. You've always been selfish? Grandma quietly set down her fork. The tiny clink echoed much louder than it should have. Linda. Mom didn't even look at her. I'm talking to my daughter. Grandma answered calmly. So am I. Silence. Mom sighed dramatically. Eleanor, please don't start. I'm simply asking everyone to enjoy lunch. Emily crossed her arms. Grandma, we're just having a conversation. No, Grandma said. You're having an ambush. I looked at her. She looked back. For just a second, something passed between us. She knew. She'd always known. The conversation moved on. At least outwardly. Inside, I was unraveling. After dessert, I slipped away toward the old swing behind the barn. It had been there since I was little. Grandpa built it from thick oak planks decades earlier. I sat down. The chains squeaked softly. Back, forward, back, forward. Sometimes repetitive movement calms anxiety. That day, nothing could. I kept hearing Mom's voice. You don't have children. You don't have a husband. What are you saving for? As if my life only had value if it benefited someone else. You always come here. Grandma's voice drifted across the yard. She lowered herself carefully onto the swing beside mine. I've been hiding here since I was 8. I know. You knew. You thought I didn't notice? She smiled gently. When children feel unloved, they always find quiet places. That sentence hit me harder than anything Mom had said, because it was true. My throat tightened. I tried so hard. I know. I kept thinking. I stared at the grass. If I got better grades, Grandma nodded, or helped around the house. She nodded again, or stayed out of trouble. By then I couldn't finish. Grandma reached over and squeezed my hand. You thought love had to be earned. A tear escaped before I could stop it. I never understood why I wasn't enough. She looked toward the house. I've asked myself that question for 28 years. We sat quietly for a while. The breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass. Kids laughed somewhere in the distance. Life continued, as if hearts weren't breaking 200 feet away. Finally, I asked, "Did I do something wrong?" Grandma turned so quickly I almost jumped. "Never ask that again." I just, "No." Her voice became firmer than I'd ever heard. "You were a child." "I know." "No." She squeezed my hand harder. "I need you to hear me." I looked into her eyes. "What happened to you?" She said slowly. "Was never because of you." I froze. There was something beneath those words. Something enormous. "What do you mean?" She looked toward the house again. "Not yet." "I mean exactly what I said." The rest of the afternoon blurred together. People opened gifts. Children played tag. Someone started grilling hamburgers. Laughter drifted through the yard. From a distance, it looked like the perfect family gathering. Up close, cracks were spreading everywhere. Mom kept making little comments, always subtle enough to avoid looking cruel. Grace was always so sensitive. Emily has such a generous heart. You know how Grace exaggerates. Each sentence sounded harmless by itself. Together, they painted the same old picture. Emily, the golden child. Grace, the difficult one. Most people nodded without thinking, because they'd heard those stories for decades. Repeat something long enough, people stop questioning it. Late that afternoon, my cousin Natalie found me washing dishes. She leaned against the counter. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Have you ever noticed Aunt Linda talks about you differently?" I almost dropped the plate. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "I don't know." She lowered her voice. "When we were kids." "Yeah? I thought you were kind of scary." I blinked. "Me?" She nodded sheepishly. "My mom always said you had anger issues." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. "I've never even been in a fight." "I know that now." She looked embarrassed. "But growing up," she hesitated. "I honestly believed you screamed at everyone." I stared at her. Cold spread through my chest. Not anger. Recognition. Mom hadn't just treated me differently. She'd been telling stories, carefully shaping everyone's perception. Tiny lies, tiny exaggerations, over years, until they became accepted facts. Natalie looked horrified. "Oh my God. What? Your face?" Everything suddenly started connecting. Relatives who always seemed cautious around me, people apologizing before disagreeing with me, the strange looks whenever I defended myself. They hadn't been seeing me. They'd been seeing Mom's version of me. That realization hurt more than the favoritism ever had. Because favoritism is personal. This was reputation, identity. It meant she'd stolen something much bigger. She'd quietly rewritten who I was, and I'd never even known. I excused myself and walked inside. The hallway felt strangely narrow. The old family photos lining the walls suddenly looked different. There was one of Emily winning a spelling bee, another of Emily at her dance recital, one of Emily holding a trophy. Then, near the end of the hallway, a photo of me. I was about 10, missing my front teeth, holding a blue ribbon from the county science fair. I remembered that day. I'd been so proud. Mom had smiled for the picture. Then, on the drive home, she'd said, "Don't get arrogant. Nobody likes a girl who thinks she's smarter than everyone." For years, whenever I saw that photograph, I'd remembered the criticism more than the ribbon. Now I realized something. The picture itself had never lied, only the story attached to it had. As evening settled over the farmhouse, Grandma called everyone into the living room. Her voice carried a weight that made even the children quiet down. Chairs scraped across the hardwood floor. Conversations faded. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward her. She stood beside Grandpa's old bookshelf, one hand resting on the polished wood. "I want to thank all of you for coming today," she began softly. "It's meant more to me than you know." Mom smiled politely. Emily checked her phone. Dad folded his arms. Grandma took a slow breath. "There are some things," she said, "I've kept to myself for far too long." The room grew still. "So before we end this birthday," she looked directly at me, then at my mother, "there's something every member of this family deserves to hear." I felt my pulse quicken. Grandma reached toward the antique cabinet in the corner, opened the bottom drawer, and slowly lifted out an old black digital voice recorder. My mother's smile disappeared. Completely. For the first time all day. She looked afraid. The room changed before anyone said a word. I know that sounds impossible, but if you've ever been in a room where the air suddenly feels heavier, where conversations die without anyone asking them to, you'll understand. Grandma didn't rush. She held the recorder in both hands as though it were made of glass, or perhaps something even more fragile. Truth. The device looked ancient. Black plastic, a tiny scratched screen, buttons worn smooth by years of use. Nobody spoke. Even the children sensed something serious was happening. Emily finally looked up from her phone. "What is that?" Grandma answered without taking her eyes off my mother. "Something I've been keeping safe." Mom laughed. Not naturally, the kind of laugh people make when they're desperately trying to convince themselves they aren't nervous. "Eleanor, honestly, you're being dramatic." "I've spent 20 years being quiet," Grandma replied. "I don't think anyone gets to accuse me of being dramatic." The smile disappeared from Mom's face again. Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Mom." Grandma looked at him. "No, David." His shoulders sank. Whatever he had been about to say, he swallowed it. I had never seen my father afraid of his own mother before. It unsettled me, because Dad wasn't a confrontational man, but he also wasn't easily intimidated. Yet now he couldn't even meet her eyes. I felt my heartbeat climbing. "What is on that recorder?" Grandma had hinted. Warned me. Asked me not to leave early. Had she planned this all along? How long had she been carrying whatever was inside that little machine? Mom crossed her arms. "If this is about Grace feeling left out again..." Grandma raised one finger. "Don't." Just one word. Quiet. Controlled. But somehow it stopped Mom in her tracks. "You've spoken over her for 28 years, Grandma continued. "You'll give someone else a turn." The silence afterward stretched painfully long. I looked around the room. My Aunt Carol looked confused. Natalie stared between Mom and Grandma like she was watching a tennis match. One of my younger cousins whispered, "What's happening?" Nobody answered. Then Grandma did something I didn't expect. She looked at me, not with pity, not with apology, with sadness. "I'm sorry." My throat tightened. "For what?" "For waiting so long." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She inhaled slowly. "I kept telling myself your parents would change. Mom scoffed. Oh, here we go. I thought, Grandma continued, they'd eventually see what they were doing. She looked down at the recorder. I was wrong. My mother suddenly stood. I think this has gone far enough. She reached toward her purse. We're leaving. Grandma didn't even look at her. No. Mom blinked. What? No. You can't tell grown adults. I can. Grandma interrupted. In my house. Emily stood too. This is ridiculous. Grandma finally turned toward her. You've benefited from this your entire life. Emily's face flushed. I don't know what you're talking about. I know, Grandma answered. That's part of the tragedy. Those words hit Emily differently. For the first time that day, she didn't look confident. She looked uncertain, almost young, like a little girl who'd wandered into a conversation she wasn't prepared to have. I'd spent years convincing myself Emily was just as guilty as Mom, but sitting there, I noticed something I'd ignored. Emily almost never started these conversations. Mom did. Emily accepted the praise, accepted the money, accepted the excuses. But Mom built the entire system. It didn't excuse Emily, not even close. But suddenly I wondered, had she also grown up believing Mom's version of reality? Grandma pressed the power button. The recorder beeped. The tiny screen flickered to life. The sound echoed through the room. Beep. Such a tiny noise. Yet my mother's breathing immediately changed. I heard it. Shorter. Shallower. Dad heard it too. He slowly turned toward her. Linda. She didn't answer. She just stared at the recorder. Grandma scrolled through several files. The clicking of the button sounded impossibly loud. Click, click, click. Every click seemed to tighten the room another degree. Finally, she stopped. There. She whispered it more to herself than anyone else. My mother took one step forward. Eleanor. No answer. I'm asking you not to do this. Grandma looked up. And I'm asking myself why you never asked that when the victim was Grace. Victim. That word landed like a brick. Victim. Not difficult child, not oversensitive daughter, not jealous sister. Victim. I wasn't prepared for how much that single word affected me, because nobody had ever called what happened to me abuse. They called it family conflict, misunderstandings, different personalities, normal sibling rivalry, victim. I felt my eyes burning. Grandma didn't press play. Not yet. Instead, she addressed everyone in the room. I want to explain why this exists. She rested the recorder on the coffee table. When Richard was still alive, my grandfather, he worried about certain conversations happening in this family. Several relatives exchanged confused glances. He told me, Grandma continued, that sometimes the only way to preserve the truth is to record it. Mom's face turned pale. Not slightly. Completely. I had never seen that expression on her before. Fear. Real fear. Grandma continued. One afternoon, she paused. About 18 years ago. 18. That would have made me 10. Richard accidentally left this recorder running after testing it. She looked at me. You and Emily were outside. I searched my memory. Nothing. She continued. Your father had gone to the hardware store. Dad slowly lowered his head. And Linda believed she was alone. Mom whispered, please. The room was so quiet that everyone heard it. Please. Not, this isn't true. Not, you're mistaken. Please. Something inside me started shaking, not physically, emotionally. It felt like standing on a frozen lake while hearing cracks beneath your feet. I didn't know what waited under the ice, but I knew my life was about to divide into two parts, before and after. Grandma looked around the room. I've listened to this recording exactly 4 times. She swallowed. Once when we discovered it. Once with Richard. Once after he died. And once. She looked directly at me. Last month. I stared at her. You listened to it without telling me? I needed to know whether it was finally time. My voice came out barely above a whisper. And? She nodded. It was. Mom suddenly stepped forward. I'm leaving. Dad caught her wrist. Not forcefully. Just enough to stop her. She looked at him in disbelief. David. He stared at her. What? His voice cracked. Is on that recorder? Mom couldn't answer. She simply looked away. Dad slowly released her arm. Then something happened that shocked everyone. He walked back, sat down, and quietly said, I think we should hear it. Mom stared at him. You can't be serious. He didn't answer. That might have been the first time in my entire life my father hadn't immediately sided with my mother. It was small, almost invisible. But I noticed. Grandma noticed too. She gave the tiniest nod. Before pressing play, Grandma said something that would stay with me forever. Memory is fragile. She looked around the room. Stories change. People forget. But recordings. She rested one finger on the device. Don't. Then. She pressed play. Static. Soft at first. The unmistakable hiss of an old recording. Then Grandpa's voice. Testing. 1, 2, 1, 2. A click. Footsteps. A chair scraping. Then silence. About 15 seconds of silence. Some people shifted impatiently. Then, the front door closed, and my mother's voice filled the room. Clearer than I expected. Much younger, but unmistakable. Finally, another voice. One I'd almost forgotten. My Aunt Susan, Mom's younger sister. You shouldn't talk about your kids like that. I froze. What? Mom laughed. Oh, please. Then, the sentence that changed everything. I only have one daughter worth investing in. My lungs stopped working. The room didn't move. Nobody breathed. Nobody blinked. Mom's voice continued through the speaker. Emily's going somewhere. A pause. Grace. A dismissive laugh. Grace will always be ordinary. I couldn't feel my hands. Aunt Susan's recorded voice sounded uncomfortable. She's 10. So? Kids hear more than you think. Mom answered casually. She already knows. A horrible silence. Then Aunt Susan asked quietly, Don't you think that's cruel? Mom sighed. Cruel? Another laugh. No. It's practical. My stomach turned. Then came the sentence I'd heard my entire life, years before I ever remembered hearing it. If I have limited time, money, and energy, Mom said, why would I waste them on the child with less potential? Gasps erupted around the room. Someone whispered, Oh my God. I couldn't tell who. The recording continued. Aunt Susan sounded genuinely disturbed. Grace adores you. I know. And? Mom answered without hesitation. That makes it easier. Silence. Then Aunt Susan whispered, I don't understand. Mom's reply was ice. Children who crave affection work harder for approval. Every hair on my arms stood up. No, no, no. The room around me blurred. Suddenly, every childhood memory looked different. Every extra chore, every impossible expectation, every withheld compliment, every moment I'd believed I simply wasn't enough. It hadn't been accidental. It had been intentional, calculated, deliberate. I wasn't failing some invisible test. The test had been designed so I could never pass. The recording wasn't over, not even close. And as Grandma sat perfectly still beside the coffee table, I realized this wasn't merely evidence of favoritism. It was evidence of something far darker. Something no one in that room, not even me, had been prepared to hear. No one moved. The old recorder kept humming softly, the static crackling beneath voices that had been trapped inside it for nearly 2 decades. I wanted to stop listening. I wanted to hear every second. Those two feelings fought inside me so violently that I couldn't tell whether I was about to cry or be sick. Grandma didn't touch the recorder. She simply folded her hands in her lap. My mother stood frozen in the middle of the living room. For the first time in my life, she had no control over the conversation. The recording continued. Aunt Susan sounded almost frightened. "Linda, she's your daughter. I know exactly who she is." "No, I mean," a long pause. "Don't you love her?" Another silence. Longer this time. I remember unconsciously holding my breath. Then Mom answered. "I love her because she's mine." She paused again. "But I don't like her." The words echoed through the room, not loudly, not dramatically, almost casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. I felt something inside me go perfectly still. Not break, not shatter. Still. For years, I'd wondered what I had done wrong. I'd replayed birthdays, report cards, conversations, arguments, trying to find the moment I'd lost my mother's affection. There wasn't one. According to her own voice, I'd never had it. Aunt Susan tried again. "Grace worships you." "I know." "Then why are you so hard on her?" Mom sighed. "Because Emily shines naturally." "And Grace?" "Grace only performs when she's desperate for approval." Another laugh. "So I keep her desperate." Nobody in the room made a sound. I looked toward Dad. His face had lost all color. He wasn't blinking. He looked like someone watching his own life collapse in slow motion. The recording continued. "I've told David not to praise her too much." My father's head snapped upward. "He gets soft." Aunt Susan asked, "Does he know why?" "No." Mom chuckled. "He thinks I'm motivating her." My father's lips parted. He whispered something so quietly I barely heard it. "Oh, God." That was it. No anger, no shouting. Just those two words. The sound of a man realizing he had failed his child. The tape rolled on. "You know what the funny part is?" Mom said. "Grace keeps trying harder." She laughed again. "Every time I move the goalposts, she works twice as hard." Aunt Susan didn't answer. "I'll give her that," Mom continued. "She's useful." Useful, not loved, not respected. Useful. I remembered being 13 and cleaning the kitchen every night, 14 and doing everyone's laundry, 15 and helping Emily with homework she'd ignored all week, 16 and taking the blame for the car accident, 22 and being asked to give Emily my graduation money, 28 and being told to hand over $20,000. Useful. It had always been the same story. Then came the sentence that made even Grandma close her eyes. "If Grace ever realizes what's happening," Mom said calmly, "I'll just tell everyone she's jealous." Static. A chair scraped. Aunt Susan whispered, "That's horrible." Mom answered without hesitation, "No. It's believable." The recording clicked. Silence. Then it ended. Nobody moved. The quiet afterward felt louder than the recording itself. Outside, I could hear birds. Children laughing somewhere across the property. The ordinary sounds of life continuing while ours had just stopped. Mom stared at the recorder, then at Grandma, then around the room. She was looking for allies, people who would smile awkwardly, tell everyone it had been taken out of context, explain it away. Instead, every face looked back at her with disbelief. My Aunt Carol was the first to speak. "You said that?" Mom swallowed. "It was years ago." "Did you say it?" Another silence. I was frustrated. "No." Aunt Carol's voice hardened. "Did you say those words?" Mom's shoulders stiffened. "I don't remember." Grandma quietly picked up the recorder. "I do." Emily finally spoke. "Mom?" Her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. "You didn't mean that." Mom turned toward her almost desperately. "Of course not. You always told me Grace just didn't care about the family." Nobody answered. Emily looked at me, then back at Mom. "You said Grace pushed everyone away." Mom remained silent. "You said she hated me." Silence. "You said she thought she was better than everyone." Silence. Emily's breathing became uneven. "You told me—" She stopped herself, then whispered, You told me Grace never wanted me around." I watched the realization spread across her face, not all at once, piece by piece, like a mirror slowly cracking. She turned toward me. I believed her. There was no anger in her voice, only shock. "I thought—" She wiped tears from her face. "I thought you hated me." I looked at my sister. Really looked. For the first time in years. She looked lost. Not triumphant. Not spoiled. Lost. "I never hated you." My voice barely sounded like mine. "I just stopped believing you wanted a sister." Emily shook her head over and over. "I didn't know." "I know." It was the truth. I finally knew. Mom had spent decades feeding each of us different stories. She hadn't only divided us, she had rewritten our relationship before it ever had a chance to exist. Dad slowly stood. The room instinctively made space for him. He walked toward me, stopped, and looked directly into my eyes. I couldn't remember the last time he'd done that. Maybe never. "I'm sorry." Just 2 words. They weren't enough. They couldn't be. 28 years doesn't disappear because someone apologizes. But unlike every excuse I'd ever heard, these words asked for nothing. No forgiveness, no understanding, no second chance, just acknowledgement. "I failed you." His voice shook. I saw pieces of it. He swallowed hard. "And every time I told myself your mother knew better." Tears spilled freely down his face. "I should have protected you." I didn't know what to say, because I'd imagined this moment 1,000 different ways. In every fantasy, I felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired. Mom finally found her voice. "This is ridiculous." Everyone turned toward her. It was one conversation. Grandma spoke immediately. "No." She opened a small wooden box beside her chair. Inside were several neatly labeled memory cards. The room collectively inhaled. "There are 23 recordings." Mom's face went completely white. 23. Grandma had not been bluffing. She had preserved years of conversations, not because she'd planned revenge, because she'd been preserving reality. "You recorded me?" Mom's voice cracked. Grandma shook her head. "No. I preserved what was already recorded." She gently rested a hand on the box. Richard never trusted technology. A faint, heartbreaking smile crossed her face. He tested everything. Sometimes he forgot to turn it off. Sometimes people forgot it was there. Mom staggered backward until the back of her knees hit the sofa. She sat down without meaning to. Grandma looked around the room. "I never wanted this." She sounded exhausted. "I kept hoping Linda would change." She looked at me. I kept hoping Grace would someday hear different words. Her eyes filled with tears. She never did. One by one, relatives began speaking. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quiet confessions. I always wondered why Grace apologized so much. I thought she seemed afraid to make mistakes. I remember Linda laughing when Grace cried. I should have said something. I noticed it too. The memories came from every corner of the room. Tiny observations, moments nobody had connected. Each one alone seemed insignificant. Together, they formed the picture of an entire childhood. Then Aunt Susan spoke. She had arrived late and had been standing near the back. "I've waited 18 years for this." Everyone looked at her. I tried confronting Linda after that conversation. She shook her head. She told everyone I was jealous. A sad smile crossed her face. So, people stopped inviting me to family events. I stared. You stayed away because of me? No. She smiled sadly. I stayed away because I couldn't pretend nothing was wrong. Mom stood abruptly. I am not sitting here while everyone attacks me. She reached for her purse. Dad didn't stop her. Nobody did. She looked around the room, almost expecting someone to follow. No one moved. Not Emily. Not Dad. Not a single relative. For perhaps the first time in her life, her version of reality had no audience. She walked to the front door. Opened it. Paused. I hope you're all happy. Grandma answered gently. No. We're finally honest? Mom left. The door closed behind her. No one chased after her. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was different. Like a room after a storm. The damage was everywhere. But the wind had finally stopped. Emily walked toward me slowly. I don't expect you to forgive me. I can't. She nodded. I know. Another pause. But she took a shaky breath. I'd like the chance to know my real sister. I looked at her for a long time. The little girl who had once shared bunk beds with me. The teenager who had accepted every compliment. The woman who had unknowingly become the center of a system built on lies. I don't know if that's possible. I know. She wiped another tear away. But if it ever is... She couldn't finish. Neither could I. That night, after everyone had gone home, I stayed behind to help Grandma clean up. We washed dishes in comfortable silence. The farmhouse felt different. Lighter. Not happier. Healing isn't happiness. Healing is when the wound is finally clean enough to hurt honestly. As I dried the last plate, I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my chest all evening. Why now? Grandma looked out the kitchen window. The doctor gave me some difficult news 3 months ago. My heart sank. What kind of news? She smiled softly. The kind that reminds you time is precious. She reached for my hand. I wasn't going to leave this world with you still believing you were the problem. I burst into tears. Not polite tears, not quiet tears. The kind that come from somewhere deep inside. 28 years of grief. 28 years of wondering. 28 years of carrying someone else's lie. Gone. Not erased, but finally named. Over the next few months, everything changed. Dad started therapy. He asked if we could meet for coffee once a week. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we sat in silence. He never defended himself again. He simply listened. Emily sold the luxury SUV Mom had helped her buy. She paid back part of what she'd borrowed from our parents. Not because I demanded it. Because for the first time, she wanted to stand on her own feet. We weren't suddenly best friends. Trust doesn't grow overnight. But slowly, carefully, we began building something we'd never been allowed to have. A real relationship. Mom refused to apologize. She sent emails insisting everyone had misunderstood. She claimed the recordings lacked context. She insisted Grandma had manipulated the family. But the problem with recorded truth is that it doesn't argue. It simply exists. Eventually, most relatives stopped responding. Without people willing to repeat her version of events, the stories lost their power. For someone who had controlled the narrative for decades, silence became the one thing she couldn't manipulate. Grandma lived another 18 months, long enough to see Christmas with all of us, long enough to watch Emily and me bake pies together for the first time, long enough to see Dad laugh without constantly looking to Mom for approval. One afternoon, while we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I thanked her. For what? For pressing play. She smiled. No. She squeezed my hand. Your grandfather deserves that thanks. She looked toward the horizon. He always believed the truth was patient. He was right. The truth had waited. 18 years inside a little black recorder. 28 years inside my heart. And when it finally came out, it didn't just expose my mother's lies. It gave me something I'd spent my entire life searching for. Proof. Proof that the little girl who tried so hard was never worth less. She never had been. She never would be. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. People often think revenge is about making someone suffer. Sometimes it is. But the most satisfying revenge I've ever experienced wasn't watching my mother walk out alone. It wasn't seeing relatives finally believe me. It wasn't even hearing those recordings. It was waking up one morning and realizing I no longer measured my worth by someone else's approval. My mother's greatest weapon had never been her words. It was convincing me they were true. The day that recording played, she lost that power forever. If you've spent your life trying to earn love from someone determined not to give it, remember this. Love that has to be earned through endless sacrifice isn't love. And someone else's inability to see your value has never been proof that you don't have any. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives with the quiet click of a play button. If this story stayed with you, let me know in the comments. What was the moment you realized the truth couldn't be hidden anymore? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true-style revenge stories where patience, courage, and the truth ultimately win. Until next time, remember, lies can survive for years, but the truth only needs one chance to be heard.